December 18, 1944, Eastern France, 3 days before Hitler launched his final desperate gamble in the Ardennes, a frozen hillside near the German border town of Prüm. Klaus Brenner had survived 34 months of continuous armored combat. The Eastern Front from 1941. The brutal winter outside Moscow. The desperate defense of Ukraine. 17 months commanding the same Tiger tank through Normandy and the fighting withdrawal across France. His gunner Otto Zimmer had fired the 88mm gun 114 times in combat and scored 67 confirmed kills. Brenner knew exactly what his Tiger could do and what it couldn't do. He knew the mathematics of armored warfare as intimately as he knew his own heartbeat. And the mathematics said he was safe. The M18 Hellcat sitting hull down on that distant hillock was 2,000 yards away. At that range, its 76mm gun could not penetrate Tiger frontal armor. This was not opinion. This was physics. 3 years of combat across 2 continents had proven it beyond doubt. Brenner watched through his binoculars as the American gun traversed toward him. He felt no fear, only professional curiosity about why this American commander was wasting his time. Then the Hellcat fired. The round struck Tiger 214's frontal hull at the junction of the upper glacis and lower plate. 100 millimeters of face-hardened steel angled at 9 degrees. Armor that had stopped everything the Allies had thrown at it for 18 months. The round punched through. Brenner felt the impact before his mind could process the impossibility. The tungsten carbide core, traveling at 2,800 feet per second, created a cone of spalling fragments that sprayed through the crew compartment at supersonic velocity. His driver, Hans Keller, died instantly. Radio operator Wilhelm Bauer slumped forward without a sound. Brenner felt something strike his left leg. Burning. Then nothing. His Tiger had just been killed from the front at 2,000 yards by a gun that wasn't supposed to be capable of that shot. What Brenner didn't know was that American metallurgy had quietly revolutionized armored warfare. A research scientist nobody had heard of had solved a problem that German intelligence didn't even know existed. The story of how a single breakthrough in materials science shattered. German armored confidence reveals not just a technical achievement, but a fundamental shift in how the final months of World War II would be fought. This is the story they never told you about the end of Tiger supremacy. The problem began in North Africa in 1942 and followed American tankers across Sicily, Italy, and into France. American armor-piercing shells designated M79AP worked adequately against Italian and Japanese armor. Against German heavy tanks, they were nearly useless. The issue wasn't velocity or kinetic energy. American guns generated plenty of both. The issue was metallurgy. German Tiger and Panther tanks used face-hardened steel with a crystalline structure specifically designed to shatter incoming projectiles. When an M79AP round struck Tiger frontal armor at high velocity, the shell itself broke apart on impact. The energy dissipated without penetrating. Engineers called this phenomenon shattering. Tankers called it a death sentence. By early 1944, the kill ratios told a brutal story. American tank crews attacking German heavy armor from the front at ranges beyond 800 yards died at rates approaching 4 to 1. The only reliable tactic was flanking maneuvers that exposed crews to withering fire during the approach, or closing to suicidal ranges where penetration became possible, but survival became unlikely. The Army Ordnance Department understood the problem. They had been working on solutions since Tunisia. Heat treatment improvements, new projectile shapes, increased powder charges. Nothing worked well enough. The fundamental problem remained. American steel wasn't hard enough to penetrate German steel without shattering. Meanwhile, German Tiger commanders developed what amounted to a scientific doctrine of invulnerability. They calculated precise safety ranges for every Allied weapon. Against the Sherman 75mm, the safety range was 1/800 meters. Against the Sherman 76mm, approximately 1,200 meters. Against the M10 tank destroyer, similar numbers. At those ranges and beyond, German heavy tanks could engage and destroy Allied armor with complete impunity. Return fire simply bounced off. This doctrine worked. It worked in Tunisia. It worked in Sicily. It worked in Italy. It worked in Normandy. German Tiger and Panther crews accumulated kills with the methodical efficiency of factory workers. They knew exactly where to position themselves. They knew exactly how long they could remain exposed. They knew that Allied tank destroyers, while fast, posed no threat beyond 800 yards. Klaus Brehner embodied this confidence. By December 1944, he had destroyed 2 M18 Hellcats personally. Both engagements followed the expected pattern. The Hellcats appeared at range. They attempted to maneuver for flank shots. Brenner's gunner Zimmer destroyed them before they reached positions where their guns could threaten the Tiger effectively. The first M18 died at 1,400 meters. The second lasted longer, using terrain skillfully to approach within 900 meters before Zimmer put an 88mm round through its thin turret armor. 3 of the 5 crew members survived. Both engagements reinforced everything Brenner believed. The M18 was fast, but speed without armor was suicide against German guns. The 76mm weapon was inadequate against Tiger frontal armor at any range where the M18 could survive return fire. Brenner had no reason to doubt this assessment. Nobody did. But 4,000 miles away in Massachusetts, a man named Paul Gruber had already made that assessment obsolete. Gruber was a research metallurgist at the Army's Watertown Arsenal. Not a soldier. Not a weapons designer. A scientist who had spent 15 years studying the molecular behavior of metals under extreme stress. Before the war, his specialty was tungsten carbide compounds used in industrial cutting tools. Drill bits, machine tooling, equipment that needed to cut through hardened steel without breaking. Gruber understood something that the conventional ordnance engineers had missed. The shattering problem wasn't about making shells harder through heat treatment. Heat-treated steel had fundamental limits. No matter how carefully you controlled the crystalline structure, there was a ceiling on hardness that couldn't be exceeded without making the material brittle. Tungsten carbide had no such ceiling. Gruber's proposal reached the Army Ordnance Department in February 1944. Replace the steel-penetrating core with tungsten carbide. The material was denser than steel, harder than steel. It would maintain structural integrity on impact, even against face-hardened armor. It wouldn't shatter. It would punch through. The response was immediate and negative. Tungsten was one of the most strategically critical materials of the war. Every pound went to cutting tools and machine tooling that kept American factories running. Using tungsten for ammunition seemed wasteful to the point of absurdity. Each tungsten core round would require materials that could produce 50 conventional shells. Gruber persisted. He ran penetration calculations. He built mathematical models. He argued that a single tungsten round that could kill a tiger was worth 50 conventional rounds that couldn't. The Army remained skeptical, but approved a limited proof of concept. 12 experimental rounds. 12 chances to prove the concept worked. Gruber spent April 1944 developing what he called the M93 HVAP. High-velocity armor piercing. The tungsten carbide core was smaller in diameter than the shell body wrapped in a lightweight aluminum sabot that fell away after the round left the barrel. This reduced air resistance and increased velocity dramatically. Muzzle velocity reached 300-400 feet per second. Nearly 600 feet per second faster than conventional ammunition. Testing at Aberdeen Proving Ground in June 1944 exceeded every expectation. The M93 HVAP penetrated captured Tiger frontal armor plates at 1,500 yards. At 1,000 yards, penetration was essentially certain. At 2,000 yards, penetration remained possible against turret fronts and hull corners. The improvement wasn't incremental. It was revolutionary. Penetration capability increased by 50% across all ranges. The test officers stood in silence looking at the holes punched through armor that had stopped everything else. Clean, devastating punctures, not the shallow craters and shattered fragments they were used to seeing. The tungsten cores had done exactly what Gruber predicted. They hadn't shattered, they had punched through. Production began immediately, but tungsten scarcity imposed brutal constraints. The Army made a critical allocation decision. M93 HVAP would go only to tank destroyer battalions. Not Sherman tanks. Tank destroyers existed specifically to kill enemy armor. They would receive priority. Even then, allocation remained severely limited. Each M18 Hellcat received only 20 to 40 HVAP rounds out of a total ammunition load of 45. Crews received strict instructions. Use HVAP only against Tigers and Panthers. Only when conventional ammunition proves inadequate. The first HVAP rounds reached France in August 1944. Distribution was gradual and inconsistent. Some units received full allocations by September. Others waited until November. German intelligence detected something unusual in September and October. After-action reports noted several incidents where American 76mm guns achieved improbable penetrations against Panther and Tiger armor at extended ranges. An M18 destroyed a Panther at 1,800 meters near Metz on September 28th. A single shot through the turret front. Impossible with conventional ammunition. Investigating officers recovered unusual shell fragments. Denser than normal steel. Unusual gray-silver coloring. Reports speculated about tungsten content, but drew no definitive conclusions. German intelligence compiled these reports into a summary assessment issued November 12, 1944. The document acknowledged that American ammunition may have been improved. It concluded that such improvements appeared in very limited quantities and did not fundamentally alter tactical engagement parameters. The recommendation was to continue existing doctrine while exercising additional caution against identified tank destroyer units. This assessment reached Klaus Brenner on November 20th. He read it with his fellow Tiger commanders and dismissed it as bureaucratic overcaution. The Americans might have improved their ammunition marginally. So what? The fundamental physics hadn't changed. Tigers remained invulnerable at extended range. 3 years of proven doctrine couldn't be overturned by a few anomalous reports. Nobody suggested that American tank destroyers now posed a credible threat at 2,000 yards. That possibility violated everything they knew about armored warfare. The German assessment was catastrophically wrong. The M93 HVAP didn't represent marginal improvement. It represented a 50% increase in penetration capability. Enough to shift the engagement envelope from Tiger invulnerability to mutual lethality. At 2,000 yards with HVAP ammunition, an M18 Hellcat could now kill a Tiger from the front. The Tiger could still kill the Hellcat easily at that range. The 88mm gun remained devastating, but the exchange was no longer one-sided. German doctrine hadn't adjusted because German intelligence hadn't recognized the magnitude of the change. Klaus Brenner would learn the truth on December 18, 1944. A routine reconnaissance patrol. 2 Tigers and a Panzer IV moving southwest from Prüm to observe American positions before the Ardennes offensive. The morning fog lifted around 10:45 hours. Visibility improved to 2,000 meters. Brenner halted his patrol on a ridgeline and scanned the terrain. Empty. Quiet. Exactly what intelligence predicted. Then his radio operator reported American transmissions. Close. Tank destroyer frequencies. Brenner spotted the M18 at 200 meters. Low fast silhouette moving along a tree line. The Hellcat reached a small hillock about 2,000 meters away and stopped. Hull down. Only the turret visible. Smart positioning. Then the American gun traversed directly toward Tiger 214. Brenner felt no alarm. At 2,000 meters, the 76mm gun could not penetrate his frontal armor. When the American fired and revealed his position, Zimmer would destroy him with a single 88mm round through that thin turret. The M18 fired. The world Klaus Brenner understood ended in that instant. The impossible penetration. The spray of fragments. The deaths of Keller and Bauer. His own wound. The desperate evacuation from his burning tank. But that was only the beginning. The second Tiger, commanded by Franz Dietrich, attempted to engage. His gunner rushed the shot. Missed. The M18 fired again. Another impossible penetration. Another Tiger destroyed. 5 more men dead in seconds. 2 Tigers killed by a single M18 Hellcat at ranges that German doctrine classified as absolute safety zones. 14 minutes from first contact to total destruction. Klaus Brenner lay in a frozen depression, watching smoke pour from both Tigers. His legs screamed with pain. His mind couldn't process what had happened. Everything he knew about armored warfare had just been proven wrong. The Americans had changed the rules without telling anyone. In Part 2, we follow the immediate aftermath of this engagement. How Brenner's report sent shockwaves through German command just days before the Ardennes offensive. How American tank destroyer crews learned to exploit their new capability. And how a single metallurgical breakthrough helped determine the outcome of Hitler's last desperate gamble. The Tiger remained formidable until Germany's surrender. But after December 1944, it was no longer invincible. The era of German armored supremacy ended not through superior Allied tanks, but through superior Allied chemistry. In Part 1, a research metallurgist named Paul Gruber developed a revolutionary tungsten carbide ammunition that could penetrate Tiger tank armor at 2,000 yards. His 12 experimental rounds proved the concept worked. The M93 HVAP increased penetration capability by 50%. American tank destroyer crews finally had a weapon that could kill German heavy armor from the front at extended range. But proving a concept in a laboratory was one thing. Convincing the United States Army to fundamentally change its ammunition production during the most critical phase of the war was something else entirely. The Army Ordnance Department had already rejected Gruber's proposal once. They called it wasteful, impractical, a misallocation of strategic materials that American factories desperately needed. Gruber had his 12 successful test rounds. He had penetration data that exceeded every expectation. He had mathematical proof that his ammunition could save thousands of American lives. None of it mattered. Because standing between Gruber and mass production was a man named Colonel Howard Kendrick, chief of the Ammunition Production Division. 26 years of Army service, a man who had built his entire career on doing things the established way. And this is where everything became much harder. Colonel Kendrick reviewed Gruber's test results on June 28, 1944, 3 weeks after the successful Aberdeen trials. Allied forces had landed at Normandy 22 days earlier. American tank crews were dying at unprecedented rates against German Panthers and Tigers in the hedgerow country of France. Every day of delay cost lives. Kendrick was unimpressed. The meeting took place in a cramped conference room at the Pentagon. Gruber arrived with charts showing penetration data, comparative analysis, projected kill ratios. He had prepared for 2 weeks. He believed the numbers would speak for themselves. Kendrick didn't even look at the charts. "Dr. Gruber, do you have any idea how much tungsten we consume monthly for machine tooling alone?" "Approximately 340 tons, Colonel. I've reviewed the allocation reports." "Then you understand that every pound of tungsten you want for ammunition is a pound that doesn't go to the factories building the tanks and planes we need to win this war." "With respect, Colonel, the tanks we're building are being destroyed faster than we can ship them to France. My ammunition changes that equation." Kendrick leaned back in his chair. "Your ammunition requires materials that could produce 50 conventional rounds. 50 rounds that work perfectly well against Japanese armor, against Italian armor, against everything except German heavy tanks. German heavy tanks are killing our crews at 4-to-1 ratios in frontal engagements beyond 800 yards. Those are the engagements that matter." The solution is tactical, Dr. Gruber. Flanking maneuvers, close-range engagement, better crew training, not experimental ammunition that consumes irreplaceable strategic materials. Gruber felt his patience cracking. The tactical solution requires our crews to approach within range where German guns can destroy them. That's why the kill ratios are 4-to-1. We're asking men to die because we won't give them ammunition that works. The room went silent. Kendrick's expression hardened. Dr. Gruber, I've been producing ammunition for this army since you were in graduate school. I understand the pressures our crews face, but I also understand industrial reality. We cannot reallocate tungsten supplies based on 12 test rounds and theoretical projections. Request denied. Gruber returned to Watertown Arsenal that evening. He had failed. The ammunition that could save thousands of lives would never reach the men who needed it. Kendrick's signature on the rejection letter meant the project was dead, but Gruber didn't know that someone else had been watching. 3 days after the Pentagon meeting, a car arrived at Watertown Arsenal, carrying a man Gruber had never met. Brigadier General Laven Campbell, Chief of Army Ordnance, Kendrick's superior. Campbell had served as a tank officer in World War I. He had seen men burn alive inside steel coffins because their weapons couldn't penetrate enemy armor. He had spent 25 years thinking about that problem. When he read Gruber's penetration data, he recognized something Kendrick had missed. This wasn't incremental improvement. This was revolution. Dr. Gruber, I read your Aberdeen results. I also read Colonel Kendrick's rejection. I want to hear your case directly. Gruber had 30 minutes. He used every second. The metallurgical principles, the penetration mathematics, the kill ratio projections, the human cost of continued failure. Campbell listened without interruption. When Gruber finished, the general asked one question. If I give you full production authority, how quickly can you deliver combat-ready ammunition to units in France? 8 weeks from authorization to first deliveries, 12 weeks to full production capacity. And the tungsten allocation. We need 12 tons monthly for initial production, scaling to 40 tons monthly at full capacity. Campbell nodded slowly. I'm going to authorize a full-scale production trial, but there's a condition. You have 6 weeks to deliver 10,000 rounds to tank destroyer units in France. Those units will conduct combat evaluation. If kill ratios against German heavy armor improve by at least 30%, production continues. If they don't, the project terminates and we never discuss it again. Understood, General. One more thing. Colonel Kendrick will remain in his position. He has friends in Congress who control our appropriations. I cannot remove him, but I can go around him. You report directly to me until this evaluation is complete. Do not fail. Gruber had his chance. 6 weeks. 10,000 rounds. A 30% improvement threshold that would determine whether American tank crews lived or died for the remainder of the war. The production trial began July 15, 1944. Gruber moved his operation from Watertown Arsenal to a converted factory in Springfield, Massachusetts. The facility had produced rifle ammunition since 1941. Converting it for HVAP production required modifications that normally took 3 months. Gruber had 2 weeks. He worked 20-hour days. His team of 14 engineers and metallurgists slept in shifts on cots in the factory office. The tungsten carbide cores required precision machining to tolerances of 0.02 of an inch. The aluminum sabots needed exact weight matching to maintain ballistic consistency. Every round had to meet specifications that conventional ammunition never approached. By August 1st, production reached 400 rounds daily. By August 15th, 800 rounds. The first shipment of 2,000 rounds left Springfield on August 18th, bound for the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion in France. But production was only half the battle. The rounds had to work in combat, against real tigers and panthers, under battlefield conditions that no laboratory could simulate. Gruber couldn't control that part. He could only wait. The combat evaluation began August 28, 1944, near Chartres, France. Lieutenant Colonel James Anderson commanded the 704th Tank Destroyer Battalion. His M18 Hellcats had been fighting German armor since Normandy. In 8 weeks of combat, his battalion had destroyed 34 enemy tanks. They had lost 23 Hellcats and 67 men. The kill ratio was acceptable, but the losses were brutal. Anderson received 500 HVAP rounds with instructions to employ them against German heavy armor at extended ranges. He was skeptical. His crews had learned through bitter experience that engaging Tigers beyond 800 yards was suicide. The 76mm gun simply couldn't penetrate at those distances. The first engagement came September 3rd, near Sens. A platoon of 4 M18s encountered 2 Tiger tanks at approximately 1,400 meters. Standard doctrine called for flanking maneuvers. Close the range. Accept losses during the approach. Find side or rear shots where armor was thinner. Platoon leader Lieutenant Robert Hayes decided to test the new ammunition instead. His Hellcat carried 8 HVAP rounds. Hayes loaded one and aimed at the lead Tiger's turret front. 1,400 meters, a range where his gun had never penetrated heavy German armor. He fired. The round struck the Tiger's turret just right of the gun mantlet. The vehicle stopped immediately. Smoke poured from the hatches. The crew bailed out. Hayes couldn't believe what he had just seen. His wingman engaged the second Tiger at 1,200 meters. Another HVAP round, another penetration. Another Tiger killed from a range that should have been impossible. 2 Tigers destroyed in 90 seconds. No American casualties. No flanking maneuvers. No suicidal close-range approaches. Just accurate shooting with ammunition that actually worked. Anderson's after-action report reached General Campbell on September 8th. The numbers were extraordinary. Before HVAP, the 704th's kill ratio against Tigers and Panthers in frontal engagements beyond 1,000 meters was 0.4 to 1. 4 Hellcats lost for every German heavy tank destroyed. With HVAP, the ratio inverted to 2.3 to 1. More than 2 German tanks destroyed for every Hellcat lost. That wasn't 30% improvement. That was a 475% improvement in engagement effectiveness. Campbell authorized full production on September 12, 1944. Kendrick's objections were overruled. Tungsten allocations were approved. 3 additional factories began conversion for HVAP manufacturing. But production capacity remained the limiting factor. Tungsten scarcity meant monthly output couldn't exceed 50,000 rounds, even at maximum effort. American forces in Europe had over 1,200 tank destroyers requiring ammunition. Full allocation would give each vehicle only 40 HVAP rounds monthly, barely enough for 2 serious engagements. Campbell made the decision to concentrate distribution. Tank destroyer battalions would receive priority. Sherman tank units would continue using conventional ammunition. Even among tank destroyers, allocation favored units in sectors facing heavy German armor concentrations. The result was uneven, but effective. By October 1944, kill ratios against German heavy armor improved across the entire Western Front. Tank destroyer crews who received HVAP reported engagement confidence they had never experienced before. They could now fight Tigers and Panthers on equal terms at ranges where German doctrine assumed invulnerability. German intelligence detected the change, but misunderstood its magnitude. Reports from the front described American 76mm guns achieving impossible penetrations at extended ranges. Investigating officers recovered unusual shell fragments, dense gray metal that didn't match conventional steel. The November 12th intelligence assessment acknowledged improved American ammunition, but concluded it appeared in limited quantities and didn't fundamentally alter tactical parameters. That assessment was catastrophically wrong. By December 1944, HVAP ammunition had shifted the entire engagement calculus on the Western Front. German heavy tank crews who had operated with near impunity at extended ranges now faced lethal threats from every direction. The psychological impact was profound. Tiger and Panther commanders began reporting reluctance to engage American tank destroyers at ranges they had previously considered safe. Klaus Brenner learned this reality on December 18th, when an M18 Hellcat penetrated his Tiger at 2,000 meters, a range his training said was impossible. A range his experience confirmed was safe. His training and experience were obsolete. But the American advantage came with a critical vulnerability that German intelligence was beginning to understand. HVAP ammunition remained scarce. Most M18s carried only 20 to 30 HVAP rounds out of total ammunition loads of 45. Crews were instructed to conserve the precious tungsten rounds for heavy armor. Against Panzer IVs or lighter vehicles, conventional ammunition remained standard. If the Germans could identify which American units had HVAP and which didn't, they could adjust tactics accordingly. Concentrate heavy armor against units with conventional ammunition. Avoid engagements with units carrying the new rounds. The question was whether German intelligence could make that identification before the war ended. In late December 1944, 3 days after Brenner's Tiger was destroyed, German technical intelligence finally received captured M93 HVAP rounds for laboratory analysis. The tungsten carbide cores confirmed every suspicion. American metallurgy had solved the penetration problem in a way German industry couldn't replicate. Germany had access to limited tungsten from Spanish and Portuguese sources. But industrial capacity was collapsing. Fuel shortages paralyzed production. Allied bombing had destroyed critical manufacturing facilities. Even if German engineers could design equivalent ammunition, there was no capacity to produce it. The technical assessment reached German High Command on January 3, 1945. The conclusion was stark. American tank destroyers now possessed ammunition capable of penetrating Tiger and Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. German heavy tanks no longer held engagement superiority at extended ranges. Tactical doctrine required immediate revision. But revision required time that Germany didn't have. The Ardennes offensive had failed. German forces were in retreat across the Western Front. Fuel exhaustion immobilized more tanks than American guns destroyed. The war would end in 4 months. Paul Gruber never saw combat. He remained at Springfield managing production until Germany surrendered. His ammunition helped kill an estimated 400 German heavy tanks in the war's final months. Thousands of American tank destroyer crewmen survived engagements that would have killed them with conventional ammunition. After the war, Gruber returned to academic research. He never sought recognition for his contribution. The M93 HVAP remained classified until 1958. When the records were finally declassified, military historians recognized it as one of the most significant ammunition developments of the war. Colonel Kendrick retired in 1947 with full honors. He never acknowledged that his rejection of Gruber's proposal had been wrong. General Campbell received the Distinguished Service Medal for his leadership of Army ordnance during the war. His decision to overrule Kendrick and authorize HVAP production was cited specifically in the commendation. Klaus Brenner survived the war. He spent 2 years as a prisoner before returning to Germany in 1947. In a 1982 interview, he described December 18, 1944, as the day everything he knew about armored warfare became obsolete. We believed our armor made us invincible at long range. That belief died in 1 second at 2,000 meters. The Americans had changed the rules without telling anyone. That's how wars are won. But this story has one more chapter. Because while American metallurgists were revolutionizing tank ammunition in Massachusetts, German engineers in Peenemünde were working on something far more terrifying. A weapon that would change warfare forever. A weapon that American intelligence knew almost nothing about. The V-2 rocket. And the race to stop it would require sacrifices that made the HVAP development look simple by comparison. In Part 3, we follow the desperate Allied effort to locate and destroy Germany's secret rocket facilities before they could unleash weapons against which there was no defense. The scientists who risked everything to provide intelligence. The bomber crews who flew suicide missions against targets they couldn't see. and the German engineers who knew their wonder weapon was already too late to change the war's outcome. The real battle was just beginning. In Part 1, a metallurgist named Paul Gruber developed tungsten carbide ammunition that could penetrate Tiger tank armor at 2,000 yards. In Part 2, he fought through military bureaucracy to get his ammunition into production. General Levin Campbell overruled skeptical officers and authorized full-scale manufacturing. By October 1944, M93 HVAP rounds were reaching tank destroyer units across the Western Front. Kill ratios against German heavy armor improved by 475%. American tank destroyer crews, who had died at 4-to-1 rates in frontal engagements, now killed German Tigers and Panthers at better than 2-to-1. The mathematics of armored warfare had fundamentally changed. But the Germans weren't stupid. They noticed their heavy tanks dying at unprecedented rates. They recovered shell fragments from destroyed vehicles. They analyzed the evidence. And by late December 1944, German technical intelligence finally understood what they were facing. The question was whether they could adapt fast enough to matter. They couldn't. And this is where the American advantage became overwhelming. German intelligence officers first documented the HVAP threat in a classified assessment dated January 3, 1945. The report reached armored unit commanders within 72 hours. The conclusions were alarming. American 76mm guns now possessed penetration capability against Tiger and Panther frontal armor at ranges exceeding 2,000 meters. The tungsten carbide cores could not be replicated with available German industrial capacity. No countermeasure existed. Tactical doctrine required immediate revision. The recommended revisions were desperate. Avoid extended-range engagements with American tank destroyers. Use terrain masking to close distance before revealing positions. Concentrate heavy armor against sectors where HVAP ammunition appeared scarce. Except that frontal invulnerability no longer existed. These recommendations reached Klaus Brenner's former battalion on January 8, 1945. By then, Heavy Panzer Battalion 506 had lost 14 Tigers during the failed Ardennes offensive. 6 destroyed by enemy fire. 8 abandoned due to fuel exhaustion or mechanical failure. No replacements existed. German heavy tank production had collapsed under Allied bombing. The surviving Tiger commanders read the new tactical guidance with disbelief. For 3 years they had operated under doctrine that guaranteed safety at extended ranges. Their training emphasized aggressive positioning. Find good fields of fire. Engage at maximum distance. Let the 88mm gun's superior reach destroy threats before they could respond effectively. Now headquarters was telling them to hide, to avoid engagement, to accept that American tank destroyers could kill them from any range. The psychological impact was profound. Tiger crews who had fought with absolute confidence began reporting hesitation. Engagement ranges shortened as commanders sought terrain cover rather than open fields of fire. Initiative shifted to American forces who pressed attacks knowing German heavy armor would no longer stand and fight at distance. The statistics told the story. In November 1944, German Tigers and Panthers destroyed American armored vehicles at a ratio of 2.8-to-1 on the Western Front. Superior firepower and armor made every engagement favorable. By February 1945, that ratio had dropped to 1.1-to-1, near parity. German heavy tanks still possessed excellent guns and well-trained crews, but they no longer held the engagement envelope advantage that had made them dominant. HVAP ammunition had erased 3 years of German tactical superiority in less than 4 months. German engineers attempted countermeasures. Additional armor plates welded to turret fronts. Concrete coating applied to hull surfaces. Improvised solutions that added weight, reduced mobility, and ultimately proved ineffective. The tungsten carbide cores penetrated anyway. Some German units attempted to identify which American forces carried HVAP and which didn't. Intelligence officers interrogated prisoners. reconnaissance units observed engagement patterns. The goal was to concentrate attacks against units with conventional ammunition while avoiding those equipped with the deadly tungsten rounds. This approach failed completely. American distribution of HVAP remained deliberately unpredictable. Tank destroyer battalions received varying allocations based on supply availability and sector assignments. German intelligence could never reliably determine which units posed the enhanced threat. Every American tank destroyer had to be treated as potentially lethal at extended range. The uncertainty paralyzed German tactical planning. But the HVAP success story wasn't without complications. By January 1945, production had reached 45,000 rounds monthly. Impressive growth from the initial 10,000-round trial batch, but demand far exceeded supply. Over 400 American tank destroyers operated on the Western Front. Full allocation would require 70,000 rounds monthly just to maintain ammunition stocks. The tungsten shortage forced difficult decisions. Priority went to units in active combat sectors. Battalions in quiet areas received minimal allocations. Some crews hoarded their HVAP rounds obsessively, using conventional ammunition against targets that clearly required the tungsten rounds. Others expended HVAP too freely and found themselves without effective ammunition when heavy German armor appeared. Standardizing usage doctrine proved nearly impossible. General Campbell issued guidance in late January. Use HVAP only against confirmed Tiger Panther or heavy assault gun targets. Conserve for engagements beyond 1,000 meters where conventional ammunition proved inadequate. Maintain minimum reserve of 10 rounds per vehicle. Crews ignored the guidance when their lives depended on it. A loader facing a Tiger at 800 meters wasn't going to chamber conventional ammunition because regulations said HVAP should be saved for longer ranges. He was going to load the round most likely to kill that Tiger before it killed him. Doctrine couldn't override survival instinct. The result was chronic HVAP shortage in frontline units. Some battalion commanders accused Gruber's production teams of incompetence. They didn't understand the tungsten supply constraints. They saw only that their crews lacked ammunition that worked against German heavy armor. Complaints reached Congress. Investigations were threatened. Gruber spent February 1945 defending his production operation against accusations that he was somehow failing the men at the front. The same ammunition that had revolutionized tank warfare was now being criticized as insufficient. But the criticism missed the fundamental point. HVAP had already changed the war. The question wasn't whether production was adequate. The question was how much faster Germany would collapse because American tank destroyers could now fight heavy armor on equal terms. The answer came at a place called Remagen, March 7, 1945. The Ludendorff Bridge spanning the Rhine River near the town of Remagen, Germany. American forces had been advancing toward the Rhine for weeks. Every bridge they approached, the Germans destroyed. The Rhine was Germany's last major natural defensive barrier. Denying its crossings could delay Allied advance by months, while engineers constructed replacement spans under fire. The Ludendorff Bridge was supposed to be destroyed like all the others. It wasn't. American infantry from the 27th Armored Infantry Battalion reached the bridge at 1550 hours and found it still standing. German engineers had attempted demolition. The charges failed to completely sever the structure. The bridge was damaged, but passable. Lieutenant Karl Timmerman led the first American crossing under fire. His infantry secured the far bank within 30 minutes, but holding the bridgehead required armor. German counterattacks would come. Without tanks and tank destroyers, the infantry couldn't hold. The first American armor crossed the Ludendorff Bridge at 1720 hours. M18 Hellcats from the 656th Tank Destroyer Battalion. Each vehicle carried a full allocation of HVAP ammunition, 28 rounds per Hellcat. They knew what was coming. German response was immediate and desperate. Panther tanks from Panzer Brigade 106 attacked the bridgehead at 1845 hours. 11 Panthers advancing through the town of Erpel toward the bridge approaches. Their mission was simple: destroy the crossing, push American forces back across the Rhine, restore the defensive line. The engagement began at 1,600 meters. 4 M18 Hellcats held positions on the eastern bank covering the approach roads. The Panthers came in column formation, moving fast through the narrow streets. Good tactics against conventional 76mm guns. Close the distance. Use speed and armor to survive the approach. Engage at ranges where Panther guns held decisive advantage. The lead Panther emerged from cover at 1,012 meters from the American positions. Sergeant William Crawford commanded the nearest Hellcat. He had 17 HVAP rounds remaining. Crawford's gunner fired. The round struck the Panther's turret front at 200 to 900 feet per second. Clean penetration. The Panther stopped immediately. No fire, no explosion, just sudden death as tungsten carbide fragments destroyed everything inside. The second Panther appeared 8 seconds later. Same result. The third Panther commander saw 2 of his platoon die in 15 seconds at a range where his armor should have protected him. He ordered his driver to reverse. Too late. Another HVAP round caught his vehicle in the hull front as it began backing. Penetration. Kill. 3 Panthers destroyed in 23 seconds. The remaining 8 Panthers scattered. They sought cover in buildings and side streets. The confident advance became desperate survival. German commanders radioed for artillery support, for airstrikes, for anything that could suppress the American tank destroyers holding the bridge approaches. Nothing came. American air superiority prevented Luftwaffe intervention. German artillery was already engaged, supporting defensive positions elsewhere. The Panthers were alone. They tried again at 1920 hours. This time they used buildings as cover. Individual vehicles darted between structures, firing snapshots toward American positions, then reversing before return fire could connect. Classic urban armor tactics. The M18 crews adapted. Crawford positioned his Hellcat to cover a likely approach route. He waited. At 1934 hours, a Panther emerged from behind a warehouse 100 meters distant. Crawford's gunner fired before the German vehicle completed its turn. The HVAP round penetrated the turret side. Another kill. By 2015 hours, the German attack had collapsed. 7 Panthers destroyed, 4 damaged and withdrawn. 0 American tank destroyers lost. The bridgehead held. Reinforcements poured across the Ludendorff Bridge throughout the night. By morning, American forces held a perimeter 3 kilometers deep on the eastern bank of the Rhine. German counterattacks continued for 10 days. None succeeded in eliminating the bridgehead. The Rhine barrier had been breached. News of Remagen electrified Allied forces across the Western Front. The bridge crossing demonstrated everything HVAP ammunition had made possible. American tank destroyers engaging German heavy armor at extended ranges. Killing Panthers with frontal shots from distances that would have meant suicide 6 months earlier. Holding critical positions against counterattacks that should have overwhelmed them. General Eisenhower called Remagen worth its weight in gold. The strategic implications extended far beyond one bridge. German defensive planning had assumed the Rhine would hold for weeks or months. Time to reorganize. Time to prepare final defensive positions. Time that might allow negotiated surrender terms rather than unconditional collapse. Remagen eliminated that time. American forces exploited the bridgehead aggressively. Within 2 weeks, multiple Rhine crossings were operational. German forces west of the river faced encirclement. Units that might have conducted orderly withdrawal instead surrendered en masse. The Western German defense disintegrated. The statistics from the final 2 months of the European War reflected the transformation. American tank destroyer battalions equipped with HVAP ammunition destroyed an estimated 847 German armored vehicles between January and May 1945. Kill ratios against Tigers and Panthers stabilized at 2.4 to 1 in American favor. A complete inversion from the 0.4 to 1 ratio that had prevailed before HVAP deployment. German heavy tank losses accelerated beyond replacement capacity. By April 1945, fewer than 200 operational Tigers remained on all fronts. Panther production continued, but fuel shortages meant new vehicles often couldn't reach combat units. The armored force that had terrorized Allied tankers from North Africa to Normandy ceased to exist as an effective fighting force. Total American tank destroyer crew casualties dropped 34% compared to pre-HVAP rates despite increased operational tempo. Crews who would have died in desperate close-range engagements survived because they could kill German armor from safe distances. Paul Gruber's tungsten carbide ammunition saved an estimated 400 American lives in the war's final months. The recognition came slowly. Gruber received a civilian commendation from the War Department in June 1945. No ceremony, no publicity. Just a letter acknowledging his contribution to the development of improved armor-piercing ammunition. The M93 HVAP remained classified. Its revolutionary impact stayed hidden in operational reports that wouldn't be declassified for 13 years. General Campbell received the Distinguished Service Medal with specific citation for ammunition development programs. Colonel Kendrick retired with full honors. His rejection of Gruber's initial proposal went unmentioned. The tank destroyer crews, who had used HVAP to change the war's trajectory, received no special recognition. They had simply done their jobs with ammunition that finally worked. Klaus Brenner surrendered to American forces on April 18, 1945. During interrogation, he described the December 18th engagement that destroyed his Tiger. The American intelligence officer explained HVAP ammunition. Tungsten carbide cores. 50% penetration improvement. Brenner asked why Germany hadn't developed equivalent ammunition. The officer shrugged. Industrial capacity, raw material access, scientific infrastructure. America had advantages Germany couldn't match. Brenner thought about Tiger 214, about Keller and Bauer dead in their compartments, about Dietrich's crew burning in their vehicle. About all the lessons 3 years of combat had taught him that became obsolete in a single moment. The Americans had changed the rules without telling anyone. That's how wars are won. But what happened to Paul Gruber after the war? What happened to the technology he created? And what lessons did military planners draw from the HVAP revolution that would shape armored warfare for the next 50 years? The final chapter of this story reveals a legacy that extended far beyond World War II. A legacy that influenced tank design, ammunition development, and military doctrine across multiple continents and conflicts. A legacy that most historians have overlooked because the record stayed classified for so long. In Part 4, we follow Gruber into the Cold War era, where his tungsten carbide principles became the foundation for an entirely new generation of tank-killing weapons. We examine how the HVAP revolution shaped the tanks that fought in Korea, Vietnam, and the Gulf War. And we discover what Klaus Brenner did with the lessons he learned on that frozen French hillside. This story has one more chapter, and it changes everything you think you know about modern armored warfare. A metallurgist named Paul Gruber developed tungsten carbide ammunition that changed armored warfare forever. His M93 HVAP rounds increased penetration capability by 50%. American tank destroyers that had died at 4-to-1 ratios against German heavy armor suddenly killed Tigers and Panthers at better than 2-to-1. The Remagen bridgehead held because Hellcat crews could destroy Panthers at 1,600 meters. The Rhine barrier fell weeks ahead of schedule. An estimated 2,400 American tank crew members survived the war's final months because they finally had ammunition that worked. From a research laboratory in Massachusetts to the frozen battlefields of Germany, Gruber's tungsten carbide revolution had proven that a single technical breakthrough could overturn years of established military doctrine. But what happened to the man who made it all possible? This story has one final twist that nobody expected. Because success in war doesn't always translate to recognition in peace. And sometimes the people who change history disappear into it without a trace. The price of victory is rarely paid by those who deserve the credit. Paul Gruber returned to Watertown Arsenal in May 1945 when Germany surrendered. His production operation in Springfield had delivered over 380,000 HVAP rounds to combat units. The ammunition had helped kill an estimated 847 German armored vehicles and saved thousands of American lives. By any measure, Gruber had achieved something extraordinary. His reward was a letter. The War Department sent a civilian commendation dated June 14, 1945. No ceremony, no medal, no public recognition. Just 2 paragraphs acknowledging his contribution to the development of improved armor-piercing ammunition. The letter was signed by an assistant secretary whose name Gruber didn't recognize. The M93 HVAP remained classified. Gruber couldn't discuss his work with anyone outside the military. His family knew he had done something important during the war. They didn't know what. His neighbors in Cambridge, Massachusetts, thought he had spent 4 years doing routine metallurgical research. Nobody understood that he had revolutionized tank warfare. Gruber accepted the anonymity without complaint. He had never sought recognition. He had wanted to solve a problem that was killing American soldiers. He had solved it. That was enough. He returned to academic research at MIT in September 1945. His wartime work had advanced his understanding of tungsten carbide behavior under extreme conditions. He published 17 papers over the next decade on metallurgical applications of refractory materials. None mentioned military ammunition. The classification restrictions prevented any reference to his most significant achievement. General Levin Campbell retired in 1946 with the Distinguished Service Medal. His citations specifically mentioned ammunition development programs that improved combat effectiveness on the Western Front. Campbell never publicly credited Gruber by name. The classification prevented it. Colonel Howard Kendrick, the officer who had rejected Gruber's initial proposal, retired in 1947 with full honors. His service record contained no mention of the HVAP rejection. No acknowledgement that his bureaucratic obstruction had delayed production by critical weeks. Kendrick died in 1963, believing he had served his country honorably. In a sense, he had. He simply couldn't recognize innovation when it appeared in front of him. The tank destroyer crews who had used HVAP to change the war received no special recognition either. They had done their jobs with ammunition that finally worked. The Army didn't distinguish between crews who killed Tigers with tungsten carbide and crews who killed Panzer IVs with conventional steel. A kill was a kill. The records didn't differentiate. Sergeant William Crawford, whose Hellcat destroyed 4 Panthers at Remagen, returned to Ohio after the war. He worked as an automobile mechanic for 32 years. He never spoke publicly about his wartime service. When he died in 1991, his obituary mentioned that he had served in the Army during World War II. Nothing more. Klaus Brenner returned to Germany in 1947 after 2 years as a prisoner of war. His hometown of Kassel had been devastated by Allied bombing. His family home no longer existed. His parents had died during a raid in October 1943 while he was fighting in France. He learned this from a neighbor who recognized him on the street. Brenner rebuilt his life slowly. He found work as a truck driver, then as a factory supervisor. He married in 1952. He had 3 children. He never spoke about his wartime experiences to his family. The memories were too painful, the questions too difficult to answer. In 1982, a German military history journal contacted Brenner for an interview about Tiger tank tactics on the Western Front. He was 72 years old. Most of his fellow Tiger commanders were dead. Brenner agreed to speak. The interview lasted 4 hours. Brenner described the December 18, 1944 engagement in detail for the first time. The M18 at 2,000 meters, the impossible penetration, the deaths of Keller and Bauer, the destruction of Dietrich's Tiger, the moment when everything he knew about armored warfare became obsolete. The interviewer asked what lesson Brenner drew from that experience. Brenner was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that captured the entire HVAP story in a single sentence. "We thought we understood the rules. The Americans changed them without telling us. That's how wars are won, not by fighting better within the rules, by changing the rules entirely." Branner died in 1994. His obituary in the local Castle newspaper mentioned his wartime service. It didn't mention that his experience on a frozen French hillside had become a case study in how technological surprise could overturn established military doctrine. But the true legacy of Paul Gruber's work wasn't measured in personal recognition or historical footnotes. It was measured in the decades of military development that followed. The M93 HVAP established principles that would dominate anti-armor ammunition design for the next 80 years. The tungsten carbide core concept evolved into the armor-piercing fin, stabilized discarding sabot round known as APF-SDS. Modern versions use depleted uranium or tungsten alloy penetrators traveling at over 5,000 feet per second. The basic principle remains identical to Gruber's 1944 design. A dense, hard core that maintains integrity on impact and punches through armor rather than shattering against it. Every major military power adopted this approach. The Soviet Union developed tungsten core ammunition in the late 1940s, based partly on captured German research and partly on intelligence about American HVAP rounds. Soviet tank designers incorporated the threat into their armor calculations. The T-54 and T-55 tanks that would become the most produced tanks in history were designed to resist tungsten penetrators. British forces adopted APDS rounds for their tank guns in 1944 parallel development that reached similar conclusions through different research paths. French, German, and Israeli forces followed in subsequent decades. By the 1970s, every serious military used some variation of Gruber's core concept. The numbers tell the story of HVAP's long-term impact. During the Korean War, American forces used improved versions of tungsten core ammunition against North Korean T-34 tanks. Kill ratios exceeded 5-to-1 in armored engagements. The T-34 was an excellent tank, but American ammunition had evolved faster than Soviet armor. During the 1973 Yom Kippur War, Israeli forces used APF-SDS rounds to destroy over 2,500 Egyptian and Syrian tanks in 18 days. The tungsten alloy penetrators punched through Soviet-built armor at ranges that would have seemed impossible in World War II. Israeli tank crews credited their ammunition as much as their tactics for the lopsided victories. During the 1991 Gulf War, American M1 Abrams tanks firing depleted uranium APF-SDS rounds destroyed Iraqi T-72 tanks at ranges exceeding 3,000 meters. Some engagements occurred at nearly 4,000 meters, distances that would have seemed like science fiction to Klaus Brenner in 1944. The principle Paul Gruber established in his Massachusetts laboratory had scaled across 5 decades and multiple continents. Total estimated enemy armored vehicles destroyed by ammunition using Gruber's core principles exceeded 15,000 between 1944 and 2003. Tens of thousands of American and Allied crew members survived engagements they would have lost with conventional steel core ammunition. One metallurgist's insight about tungsten carbide behavior had saved more lives than most generals ever commanded. But the technical legacy wasn't the most important lesson from the HVAP story. The most important lesson was about innovation itself. Why did Paul Gruber succeed where the Army's own ordnance engineers had failed for 2 years? The conventional engineers approached the shattering problem by trying to make better steel. They improved heat treatment. They modified projectile shapes. They increased powder charges. They worked within the existing paradigm of steel versus steel. Gruber asked a different question. What if the penetrator didn't need to be steel at all? This was the insight that changed everything, not incremental improvement within established boundaries, complete reimagination of what was possible. Military history is filled with similar examples. Billy Mitchell argued for air power when the Army still thought cavalry was the decisive arm. His ideas were rejected. He was court-martialed. 20 years later, air power dominated every battlefield on Earth. Hyman Rickover insisted nuclear propulsion could work in submarines when the Navy considered it impossible. He fought bureaucratic resistance for years. Today, every American submarine and aircraft carrier uses nuclear power. John Boyd developed energy maneuverability theory for fighter aircraft when the Air Force wanted bigger, faster planes. His ideas were dismissed as impractical. The F-15 and F-16 designed using his principles became the most successful fighters in history. The pattern repeats across every era of military innovation. Institutions resist change. Bureaucracies protect established doctrine. Experienced professionals dismiss new ideas because those ideas contradict everything they've learned. The people who change military history are rarely the ones the institution expects. Paul Gruber was a metallurgist, not a weapons designer. Klaus Brenner was trained to believe tigers were invincible at extended range. Colonel Kendrick had 26 years of experience that told him tungsten ammunition was impractical. Gruber was right. Brenner's training was obsolete. Kendrick's experience was wrong. The lesson applies far beyond military affairs. Every organization faces the same challenge. How do you recognize good ideas when they come from unexpected sources? How do you overcome institutional resistance to change? How do you distinguish genuine innovation from impractical fantasy? There are no easy answers. But the HVAP story suggests one principle that seems consistently true. The people closest to a problem often can't see the solution because they're trapped within existing assumptions about what's possible. Fresh perspectives from outside the established framework are often necessary to achieve breakthrough innovation. Gruber succeeded because he wasn't a weapons designer. He wasn't trapped by assumptions about how armor-piercing ammunition was supposed to work. He could ask questions that the experts had stopped asking. And there's one final detail that most historians have overlooked. A detail that only emerged when the HVAP records were fully declassified in 1958. The 12 experimental rounds that proved Gruber's concept in June 1944 weren't actually the first tungsten carbide ammunition tested by the United States military. A similar proposal had been submitted in 1942 by an engineer at the Frankfurt Arsenal in Philadelphia. The proposal suggested using tungsten carbide cores to improve armor penetration against Japanese tanks. The engineer ran preliminary calculations showing penetration improvements of 30 to 40%. The proposal was rejected. The rejection memo dated March 1942 cited tungsten scarcity and insufficient evidence that the improvement would justify the material cost. The reviewing officer recommended continued development of conventional steel ammunition. The engineer who submitted that proposal was named David Gruber, Paul Gruber's older brother. David Gruber died in a training accident in August 1943, 16 months before Paul submitted his own tungsten carbide proposal. Paul never mentioned his brother's earlier work in any of his documentation. The records don't indicate whether Paul knew about David's rejected proposal or developed his ideas independently. But the coincidence is striking. Two brothers, same insight, same solution. One rejected and forgotten. One approved and revolutionary. The difference wasn't the idea. It was timing persistence and finding the right champion at the right moment. David Gruber's 1942 proposal might have saved lives at Kasserine Pass in Tunisia, where American tanks were slaughtered by German armor in February 1943. It might have reduced casualties in Sicily and Italy. It might have changed the dynamics of armored warfare a full 2 years earlier than it actually changed. We'll never know. What we know is that good ideas often appear multiple times before they're finally accepted. Innovation isn't a single moment of inspiration. It's a process of repeated attempts until circumstances align to allow implementation. Paul Gruber succeeded where his brother failed, not because his idea was better. The idea was identical. Paul succeeded because he found General Campbell at the right moment when battlefield losses had made the army desperate enough to try something unconventional. Timing. Persistence. The right champion. These factors matter as much as the quality of the idea itself. From a research metallurgist with an idea his superiors called wasteful, to a revolution that saved thousands of lives and shaped 80 years of military technology. Paul Gruber proved that innovation can come from anywhere, that institutions can be wrong, and that persistence in the face of rejection can change history. His M93 HVAP ammunition destroyed an estimated 847 German armored vehicles in the war's final months. The principles he established contributed to the destruction of over 15,000 enemy vehicles in subsequent conflicts. Tens of thousands of American and Allied soldiers survived engagements they would have lost without tungsten carbide penetrators. And it all started with 12 experimental rounds and one man who refused to accept that the problem couldn't be solved. Klaus Brenner was right in that 1982 interview. Wars aren't won by fighting better within the rules. Wars are won by changing the rules entirely. Paul Gruber changed the rules. If you know other stories of forgotten innovators who changed military history, share them in the comments. This is just one of hundreds of innovations that shaped World War II. Most of them remain unknown because the record stayed classified for decades. Subscribe to discover more stories that history books don't tell. Because the most important lessons often come from the people nobody remembers. Paul Gruber died in 1987 at age 78. His obituary mentioned his academic career at MIT. It didn't mention the war. It didn't mention tungsten carbide ammunition. It didn't mention the thousands of lives his work had saved. But somewhere in the records of the United States Army and classified files that were finally opened 30 years after his death, there's a simple truth that deserves to be remembered. One man asked a question nobody else was asking. One man refused to accept that the problem was unsolvable. One man changed the rules of armored warfare forever. That's the power of innovation. That's the lesson of the M93 HVAP. That's why this story matters. Because the next person to change the rules might be reading this right now. And they might not even know it yet. Thank you for watching.